And Professor Kengore, who will be on the program in 15 minutes, he has a great piece in the American Spectator. He says a culture of pinkos and fellow travelers has become the new John Birch Society. Nancy Pelosi wakes up every day wondering what the Ruskies are up to. Every single day, tweeted the San Francisco Democrat turned Cold Warrior, I find myself asking, what do the Russians have on Donald Trump personally, financially, and politically? The answer to that question is the only thing that explains his behavior and his refusal to stand up to Putin. Gee, Congresswoman, I never knew you were such a Russia hawk. Actually, I never knew the entirety of the Democrat Party and the progressive movement was such saber-rattling hardliners. Obama CIA Chief John Brennan claims that President Trump is wholly in the pocket of Putin. During the Cold War, John Brennan was wholly for Gus Hall to be President of the United States. And Gus Hall was wholly in the pocket of the Kremlin. In fact, the Kremlin put in the pocket of Gus and his Communist Party USA millions of dollars in illegal subsidies every year. But John Brennan, too, is now a Russia hawk. He's gunning for the Ruskies. And by the way, as you know, he voted for Gus Hall. What is it with you liberals, writes Kengore? Do you see a bugaboo, FDR's phrase to ridicule Congressman Martin Dies, under every bed? What's next? Democrats, a resurrection of the House Committee on Un-American Activities? Maybe Maxine Waters grilling staffers in the Trump White House. Are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? Congresswoman, have you no shame?
Impeachment. 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 The impeachment. Of course, impeachment. Impeachment. That's where impeachment comes in. Impeach 45!
It's only a matter of time before Hillary Clinton heads to Wheeling, waving a list of 205 Russian spies in the Trump State Department. There's old tail gunner Joe Biden to charge Trump with a conspiracy so immense.
No, I wish you were in high school. I could take him behind the gym.
This hypocrisy is outrageous. It's outrageous that it took charges of Russian meddling against Hillary Clinton to finally make progressives give a damn about the dangerous deceit of the Kremlin. President Donald Trump had a golden opportunity on Monday to stare down Russian President Vladimir Putin and tell him in no uncertain terms that Russia's meddling in the 2016 election was totally unacceptable, and that if anything like it continued going forward, there'd be a major and serious penalties to pay, fumed CNN's Chris Cillizza. Cillizza called it the most shameful, stunning moment of the Trump presidency. Hey, but heck, Chris, that's nothing compared to the shameful, stunning shooting down of Korean airliner 007 in September 1983, or the shameful, stunning shooting down of Pope John Paul II in May 1981, merely two totally unacceptable actions committed while Putin was at the KGB in the 1980s. Ronald Reagan called the USSR an evil empire for such deadliness, and liberals howled in protest. But those nasty Russians, they crossed the line when they went after Hillary's White House bid. For 100 years, the Kremlin has engaged in misinformation, murder, and mayhem. The Russian word for disinformation, disformitsya. I wrote the foreword to a book on the subject titled Disinformation by the highest-ranking Soviet bloc defector, Lieutenant Colonel Aya Mahali Pasipa. Liberals never gave a rip about Russian agitprop. Quite the contrary, they dismissed it as paranoia by red-baiting right-wingers. The Russians orchestrated deliberate active measure campaigns against the Reagan administration. And yet, when conservatives called attention to spies, dupes, fellow travelers, and agents of influence, liberals ridiculed them as McCarthyites. Glad to see that progressives finally care. My response to liberals now seeking my opinion on Russian meddling? You're too late. Where were you when we tried to get you to pay attention to your hero Ted Kennedy and his secret overtures to the KGB? I suppose you're ready to open your op-ed pages for me to weigh in on scandalous dossiers sitting somewhere in the Kremlin ripe for blackmail, but only if the dossier pertains to Donald Trump.
No, I wish you were in high school. I could take him behind the gym.
Oh, damn.
It says, beginning a year ago, I published in English and Russian a May 1983 KGB document on Ted Kennedy, I've also tried to determine if the Kremlin is holding a larger Kennedy file. And he says, nobody cares. Nobody cares. Nowadays, he says, liberals are spilling lots of ink on Moscow dossiers, but only because the subject is Donald Trump. Reporters at the New York Times and CNN are practically modern-day John Birchers in pursuit of the grandest of Moscow conspiracies. Today, July 2018, it took merely one Trump-Putin press conference for an AP reporter to ask Putin to his face if he had any compromising material on Donald Trump. If only a reporter would ask a question just once over the course of decades about Ted Kennedy and the Kennedy family. But for liberals, it's now a full-blown crusade against the Ruskies. The guns and gulags and Yalta and Caitlin and Alger Hiss and the Rosenbergs didn't fire them up, but hell hath no fury like a Hillary supporter scorned by the Kremlin. I'll be right back.
Mark Levin.